It's the opening contest in the US presidential primary season. Voters in Iowa have gathered for the state's caucuses to pick the Democrat, but also the Republican that they want to be in the running for the White House this autumn. Hello and a very warm welcome back to this special edition from the France 24 newsroom here in Paris. It's the first and it's also one of the most important to bag. All eyes are on the US state of Iowa, where the curtain has been raised on this year's election season. Voters have been deciding which of the 11 Democratic candidates is best placed to push Donald Trump from the White House this autumn, with caucuses being held at some 1,600 sites across the state. Now, we understand that a technical issue has hampered the actual publishing of the final results, but we are told that they are due very soon. With more on what's at stake and why we should be paying attention to this ballot, here's Yuka Waye.
It looks as if voting has already started, but this was a mock caucus held last week in the Iowa town of Des Moines.
It's time to dream big and fight hard.
Just like in the actual event, supporters representing different candidates took to the stage for one final push.
You got to convince your neighbors, your precinct members, why your candidate is the best. You got to form your group.
The Iowa caucuses are the first time voters in the United States get up and say who they want to be president. Unlike in a primary, people don't just cast their ballots. They have hours of conversation and a vote. First, they stand in an area designated for their chosen candidate. If that person doesn't get the minimum 15% of the vote to get past the precinct, they can shift their support to another candidate, and intense lobbying ensues.
It's not a secret ballot. You're actually there literally with your neighbors. They can try to persuade you. They can try to offer you incentives to come over their way. We've seen candidates who are polling at 12% and got 20%, and the reverse. It's actually very common there.
Not only is it the nation's first, but the vote here has traditionally been seen as an early bellwether for the national race. Since 1972, 9 out of 12 Democratic candidates who won the Iowa caucuses went on to become the party's nominee for president.
People who do well here typically do well throughout the rest of the process. They can talk to large groups of people, they can talk to small groups of people. They have a strong message, they have a strong organization, and that propels them on to victories later on down the process, and it propels them, in a lot of cases, to the White House.
There have also been controversies. After a very close contest between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in 2016, the Democratic Party changed rules to make the caucus system more transparent. This year, 3 sets of results will be reported.
Well, for more on what's been happening in Iowa, we're joined here in the studio by Edmund Dean, a somewhat semi-Iowan, that's probably fair to say, right, who's been casting his ballot here in Paris. He believes that Bernie Sanders has what it takes to seal the deal and win the day. Edmund, before we come to you for some questions, here's a closer look at Bernie Sanders' campaign and his ideals.
4 years on from his defeat to Hillary Clinton, 78-year-old Bernie Sanders is as prominent a figure in American politics as ever before. The firebrand Vermont senator, officially registered as an independent, is further left than most of the Democrat Party. He counts the Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez among his most vocal supporters and is highly popular among young people. His key policies include the scrapping of student debt, an increase of the minimum wage, universal health care, and the implementation of a Green New Deal. The Brooklyn native has been active in politics for more than half a century, first as an activist, then as a representative in 1991, and finally as a senator in 2007. Despite suffering a heart attack in October, Bernie Sanders has fought this latest campaign with a lot of energy and is pining for a different result this time around.
And that is something I will never forget.
It was Sam Bradpeace reporting there. Edmund Dean is with us here in the studio. He's a Bernie Sanders supporter. Edmund, what makes you think that Bernie Sanders is the right man with the right credentials and the strength to unseat Donald Trump in this coming presidential election this autumn?
Yeah, it's a really big field, isn't it? And picking one is hard, regardless of the qualifications. I mean, I got into Bernie Sanders in 2016. I was actually involved in the Draft Warren, a social media campaign to try to get Elizabeth Warren to run in 2016. That didn't work out. She declined. A lot of that support translated pretty much directly to Bernie Sanders as the progressive candidate in that race. And I thought the way he ran the campaign against, not just against Hillary Clinton, but also campaigning against Trump, leading down that final stretch for Hillary Clinton. The message he made was consistent. It was a message of basically fundamental human rights in terms of universal access to healthcare, general access to education. Things in Europe we take for granted, to be honest. But these are things which most Americans don't enjoy.
But you do agree that he does have his faults and there are
certainly
flaws in his policy. Talk us through that.
So I think the one thing that's generally observed about Bernie Sanders at a personal level is that he seems very sort of curmudgeonly, and he comes out and he doesn't smile much, and he talks policy non-stop for like 40 minutes. And that can be a little bit off-putting. You know, if you're used to kind of the smiley, jokey politician of the future, that's a bit strange. But, you know, if you do want someone who actually talks shop seriously and has been saying basically the same thing since before I was born, that is very compelling in a way. And I think after Donald Trump, who is kind of, dare I say, all style and very little substance, I think some people find that quite refreshing. On substance, there is the issue of socialism. There is the issue of whether you can sell a very bold, progressive, social democratic action to America on a broad scale. That's untested. I don't know, to be honest.
But just more generally, the whole democratic field, it is a very crowded field.
Yes.
What do you make of the offer that's on the table?
The offer on the table from the whole field?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question, yeah. I mean, the field is probably the best field I've seen in recent times from the Democrats in terms of diversity of opinions, at least early on in terms of ethnic diversity and representation as well, though unfortunately a lot of those candidates have stepped out. It's a relatively progressive field. You know, if we're talking about Joe Biden as the establishment candidate, 8 years ago, Joe Biden was certainly not the establishment candidate. So that's probably a step forward. I went into that caucus thinking in Paris here, thinking, well, if Bernie Sanders is not viable, I could vote for pretty much anyone, and I'd think about that. But if we are talking seriously about, okay, who's going to reach a broad consensus, who's going to inspire people, who's going to actually challenge Donald Trump head on, I do think Bernie Sanders is one of those best candidates because even though the style is awkward, the style seems to work. People go in thousands to his rallies and listen to him speak, and they really care about these issues, particularly healthcare and access to healthcare.
Okay, we're going to actually head now back to our correspondent, Ketavan Gorgistani, who's following developments for us in Iowa. Ketavan, we're apparently still waiting for these results to come through.
Yes, and now the results have been delayed pretty much about an hour as we speak. But there's been a statement from the Iowa Democratic Party saying that the integrity of the result is paramount. We have experienced a delay in the results due to quality checks and the fact that the IDP is reporting out 3 data sets for the first time. That's, of course, the number of delegates, the first round results, and the second round results. So they're saying basically that the fact that they're reporting 3 different sets of numbers is part of the reason for these delays. What they know right now, they're saying, is that around 25% of precincts have been reported, and early data indicating that turnout is on pace with 2016. So that means that we're not really on pace for the record, which was set back in 2008 when there were about 240,000 voters turning out. This time we're more along the lines of 2016. That's pretty much all the information that we have so far. Of course, we're waiting for these results to come out, but there are questions being asked right now as to what really is behind the question of this delay. Is it really because they're double checking these numbers? Is it a technical problem? Is there something else? And that's really what everyone is focused on right now, even though in previous Democratic caucuses here in Iowa, by this hour, 1 hour after these results were published, we already had about 70% of precincts reporting. So there is something definitely off. What it is exactly, we don't know yet.
Ketavan, I'm here with our international affairs commentator, Doug Herbert, who has, I think, something to ask you.
No, not to Ketavan. I was just going to comment, what you was just saying about. First of all, I think we need to sort of underline a few things here, because it's easy early on to get breathless about delays in reporting results. We're living in this age where we expect somehow through the miracle of cyberspace and electronic technology that everything, the second, the polls close, whatever, we're supposed to know about it right away. So our reflex, first of all, deep breath and take a step back. It doesn't mean that there is some major screw up, so to speak, just because we don't have as many results at this point as we did last time. First of all, the process this time, as we know, is more complicated. The actual, the procedures that they're going through with these votes. Whereas last time we were only talking about the number that each station had to report out, that super the delegate count. This time they have those 3 tabulations to do. So we're talking about the first alignment, then the second round, the realignment, the so-called realignment, and then the delegate count. And based on the fact that last time it was such, as Ketavan was reporting before, it was such a tight race between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton last time in Iowa, literally by several fractions of a percentage point, that the Sanders campaign this time was pretty instrumental in demanding some more stringent checks, quality control. Before you push out those numbers, we want to get them right. We want to get all the numbers right, based on the fact that we now have this more extensive reporting going on, so that there's some paper trail, at least, being able to really solidly trace what is going on here. So that would be my one addition at this point. It's not to say, who knows, if obviously if hours and hours pass and we still are in this position sitting here saying, where are the results, then I think we could start to, if not push the panic button, start to ask some probing questions. But at this point, I do think that our impulse is to get extremely impatient, extremely quickly. I would say let's just take a step back. There's a lot of votes to count. It's complicated. Yeah, they're having a few, it looks like some tech stumbles here and there, but I think we will see them soon come out. Quarter of the precincts apparently have reported they haven't been able to get all the results out, but some people have literally been reportedly on the phone trying to call them in because they can't right now get them out on the app.
Edmundine, maybe we should be more patient than, as Doug was saying, in waiting for these results. But you do have something to say about the actual caucus process.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, it's a very arcane process. Ketavan explained it really well, I think. But it's a deliberative democracy process. It's not really a vote technically. Actually, what you're doing is trying to decide who gets what delegates. Or in this case, sort of fractions of delegates sometimes. But how do you fit a deliberative democratic process, which is normally quite selective, with something you want large numbers of people to participate in? And there's a lot of issues with caucusing, with access for disabled people. And it was mentioned in one of our segments how there was a caucus venue they designed for disabled people, which is great. But I'm guessing there isn't one of those in every town. So that can be tough. It can be tough for people who even get to a caucus physically. So if you're thinking about all the things we take for granted in most elections, like postal votes and absentee votes, this has kept me away from the Iowa caucus because I've been living in the UK for the last 10 years. I've not realistically been able to vote. I've had to vote in the Democrats Abroad primary, which takes place later in the calendar. So it's the first time I've caucused in a number of years. So I feel very lucky. But with those accommodations also comes a great deal of technical challenges.
And beyond the technical, the technical challenges and what we were just talking about, I think the caucus adds another dimension of difficulty in the exercise of democracy, in the sense that, but besides physically having to get to your caucus station, you then have to stay there. You have to stay put for a while. You don't just simply, it's not like a primary or a general election where you walk into your voting booth, pull the curtain, press a button or check off a box, and you're out of there, and your day goes on. You are literally, depending on where you go, it could be up to 2 hours, maybe even longer. So that is definitely a difficulty. And then there's and this is obviously debatable, different people will feel different ways about it. It's a very public, you are on public display in expressing your political allegiances. Now, some people are absolutely fine with that, but there's also the idea of, your secret, your own personal democratic choice. You don't necessarily want everyone to know about it. In Iowa, you are on public display. You are exhibit number one. I am voting for Bernie Sanders. I am voting for Elizabeth Warren. Your neighbors know it. Their neighbors know it. So that adds a dimension. I'm not saying you have to be an extrovert to be part of the caucusing process. You don't have to, be an actor made for the stage or something. But there has to be there has to be a part of your temperament, someone who wants, is determined enough and has no issues or complexes about other people knowing where they stand politically, and is also willing to engage themselves, to put that effort in, the physical effort of getting there and the effort of staying there and then engaging, talking, speaking, mixing with other people. It's the deliberative process. It's a social process in many respects.
And presumably it's also harder or more difficult for candidates to try and drum up support then.
Well,
to get people to come from their homes to sit for 2 hours.
They managed to do it, and that's the methods, as you probably know a lot better than I do, are getting more sophisticated by the caucus. I mean, it used to be, okay, we'll bus you over, we'll carpool you over. If you can't get there, we'll provide a car. Soon they'll be beaming people over, probably.
Yeah, I mean, apparently, Amy Klobuchar was just encouraging people to bring baked goods and stuff, make them feel welcome, which is perfectly legitimate. I felt sorry for, and our Paris caucus, Buttigieg was on 2 votes, and our viability target was 3. So they spent a lot of time trying to persuade people to come into their camp, and they kept asking for more time, and we were very gracious, I think, and giving them as much time as they wanted. They didn't get there in the end, but it does look like Pete's doing quite well across the state, so...
OK, well, it's not just Iowa where Americans have been having their say. A handful of satellite caucuses have already taken place, like here in Paris, which Edmund took part in. Servicemen and women and overseas students from countries including Egypt and Italy are among those who've descended on a meeting room just a stone's throw from the Louvre Museum to have their say. France 24's Charlie James has sent this report from there.
This right here is American democracy in action, except we're in Paris. We're in a government building in the center of the city. This is one of 3 satellite Iowa caucuses going on overseas that allows Iowa voters who are maybe here for school or for work or in the military to take part in the caucuses. Now, the Iowa Democratic Party started sanctioning these events this year in order to increase accessibility to the caucuses. It's one of the things that's been criticized about the caucus process, that you have to be in a certain place at a certain time, and that can be difficult for a lot of people. Now, a lot of the participants here did still travel from a long way, from Cairo, from Germany, from Italy, to be a part of it, but they said it was that important to them. They didn't want to miss it.
This is my first caucus. I just also happened to be the one who organized it. And I think it's just so important to be civically engaged, especially in our political climate. So I knew I had to caucus by whatever means possible, and I ended up getting this application from a friend named Oscar Rodriguez, and he said, this is how you can caucus. And so it kind of all spiraled from there. Yeah, it's important to me to be able to caucus.
I came down from London last Thursday, and I've been spending the weekend in Paris, but now kind of ending my time with this wonderful tradition.
Why was it important for you to be a part of this event?
Because the stakes for our country are so high right now. I just can't express that enough, how important it is that every single person who has an opportunity to get involved. And so I wanted to represent that personally by making the trip out of London and down to Paris and coming all the way to do this, because the stakes are so high and I feel it's that important.
Still closer than Iowa, though. It must be a little surprising that you were able to do this.
Absolutely. I was very excited when I found out that there was going to be a satellite location in Paris, because you're right, it's way closer than Iowa, and I was ready to buy a ticket and fly back to Iowa to participate. That's how serious I am about this. So definitely glad to be a little bit closer to my home in London.
So the Paris Satellite Iowa Caucus has just wrapped up, and here's the results for you. Warren won this round with 2 delegates awarded, a total of 8 people that caucused for her. Sanders picked up 6 people and 1 delegate, and Amy Klobuchar 3 people, and will also take away 1 delegate. So all of the caucus goers here wrapping up the process. Those results were actually FaceTimed back to Iowa to be reported. That's what American democracy looks like in this day and age.
Charlie James reporting there from Paris. Some other world news for you now. The Chinese government says the number of people who've died from the coronavirus there now stands at least 425. Beijing has agreed to let American experts in as part of the WHO's efforts to deal with this health emergency. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, though, says that Washington should stop overreacting. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, over 2,000 medical personnel have downed tools in protest, calling on their government to shut the border with the mainland to prevent this virus from spreading.
This group is among the hundreds of healthcare workers who went on strike, demanding government action.
If we don't shut down the border from mainland China, the community outbreak in Hong Kong would happen very soon.
If they don't ban people with the new coronavirus from getting into Hong Kong, all medical work is meaningless.
As well as a border closure, striking medical workers are asking the government to step up efforts to effectively contain the spread of the new coronavirus. Hospital Workers Union, HAEA, is threatening to continue the action until their demands are met. Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has suspended high-speed rail services to the mainland and cross-border ferries, but has stopped short of closing the entire border. Live produce continues to come from China, even though the source of the outbreak is still unconfirmed. About 90% of the city's food is imported, with the bulk coming from the mainland.
I don't agree with shutting down our borders. If we do that, Hong Kong's economy will definitely suffer, and we will end up with no food to eat.
The epidemic is expected to pile pressure on Hong Kong's economy, which sank into recession in the third quarter of last year, as pro-democracy protests gripped the city for months, hitting its retail and tourism sectors hard.
Next, they're still technically at war, but that may soon be about to change. Sudan is on track to become the 3rd Arab nation to officially recognise Israel, with leaders from both countries holding normalisation talks in Uganda on Monday. Fraser Jackson has more.
After his arrival in Uganda, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had a message for the continent. Israel is looking to increase its foothold.
Israel is coming back to Africa, and Africa is coming back to Israel in a big way.
And one of the countries in which Netanyahu sees big potential, Sudan. On the sidelines of his Ugandan visit, Netanyahu held a surprise meeting with the chairman of Sudan's Sovereign Council, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Following 2 hours of secretive talks, Netanyahu's office proclaimed that the pair had promised to start cooperation that would lead to the normalization of ties. And that would be a significant step. Sudan is counted among the Arab League of Nations, which has fervently promoted the Palestinian Arab cause. A move for Sudan to establish relations without an answer to the Palestinian question would represent a significant change from the past. Declared historic by Netanyahu, the meeting was not welcomed by all.
This meeting is a stab in the back of the Palestinian people. It comes at a time when the administration of President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu are trying to destroy the Palestinian cause.
With another election just a month away, a peace deal with Sudan could prove to be a significant boost for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Now, as the Brexit dust continues to settle following Friday's official departure, the French president has turned his attentions to the east of the bloc. Emmanuel Macron was in Poland this Monday, where he called for the trilateral ties between Warsaw, Paris and Berlin to be boosted, saying that this trio now bears the responsibility for Europe's future. His Polish counterpart also stressed that the union should be run better and should be more attractive, so that no member of the club should ever want to leave again. Nicholas Rushworth has more.
Operation Seduction in Poland. President Emmanuel Macron says he wants closer ties with Warsaw to reshape the EU now the UK has split away. He is suggesting a return to trilateral Weimar Triangle consultations with Germany, the first in years, saying the three countries bear the responsibility for the EU's future.
The security and stability of Europe and its partners are France's main priority. I would like this visit to be a turning point, so we can play a role together for the sake of Europe's future.
As the two countries inked a cooperation deal, Macron stated that he wanted misunderstandings cleared up. That message contrasts to his previous criticism of Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party, led by Jarosław Kaczynski, on certain issues, from Poland's continuing reliance on coal to its move to bring the Polish judiciary under political control. The French president on Monday urged Warsaw to step up its dialogue with the EU on the ongoing reforms of the judicial system. A new chapter then is announced in a bid to influence the shape of a new European Union post-Brexit.
And that brings us up to date. Do stay with us here on France 24. More world news still to come.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
Reporting from across West Africa.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches. Bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. 10 seconds. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.